Recording in progress.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Standards Committee for Conwy.
And I'm the chair of the Standards Committee for Conwy CBC. I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting this morning. This is a multi-location meeting here in the chamber, but also people tuning in online. If you are doing so as a member of the public, you're very welcome. Thank you for your interest in our deliberations. The meeting will be live streamed and recorded and will be available for viewing after the meeting. Should the live streaming fail, the meeting will continue and the recording will be available through the council's website following the conclusion of the meeting. Can I remind members this morning that translation facilities are available and for those attending remotely to choose your language of choice. For those wishing to speak in the chamber, please raise your hand. For those attending remotely, please use the raise hand function. We will alternate between speakers in the chamber and remote attendees. For those attending remotely, please note that those in the chamber will be enabled to use the chat facility. Committee members who are attending remotely are required to leave their camera on throughout the debate and when voting in order to maintain the integrity of the decision-making process. If you do need to leave the meeting temporarily, please put a message in the chat function so the Democratic Services Officer is aware and then let us know when you return. I expect everyone present and participating in this meeting to conduct themselves appropriately and be respectful to each other. That applies to members, officers, and anyone in the public gallery. Can I remind you, as there is an exempt item on the agenda today, that you should be the only person able to hear any confidential and an exempt items being discussed. I hope that's clear. But finally, from me this morning, in terms of the preamble, can I warmly welcome our two new independent members to the committee, Maggie and Glyn. Thank you for submitting yourselves to our selection process, and we're delighted that you're both now able to join the committee. Thank you. So into the meeting then. Item one is...
Before you start,
yes, ma'am.
Can I offer my sincere apologies for missing the first meeting? And I'm delighted to attend this one. Trouble with the motor, the car. Sorry.
Frank, it's very good to see you, Councillor Frank Bradfield. I think I told them all about you before you got here, Frank. So rest assured, you're well introduced. It's good to see you. So I think we have actually everybody here now. So in terms of apologies, Sally?
No apologies. Everyone's here, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Item 2, declarations of interest. I'll remind members that they must declare the nature of their declared personal interests. So are there any personal interests relating to our agenda this morning? I have one personal declaration to make relating to item 7. I think for reasons which are self-explanatory, at which point another member of the team will take the chair. No others? Item 3 then, urgent matters. I've not been notified of any. Mark, do we have aware of any this morning?
No, none, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on to the minutes of our last meeting then, not too long ago, on the 7th of September, at pages 49 in your pack. Unless there are any comments on the accuracy, could I have a proposer that they be accepted as a proper record, please? David proposed, seconded. Brenda? Can we have show of hands, please? Unanimous, thank you very much. So I think there's one matter arising from the minutes, Mark, we shall take. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just to mention in respect of page 7, which is about the annual report. The annual report was received at the last council meeting, and there is also a requirement for that then to be submitted to the Public Services Ombudsman for Wales office, and that has been done in accordance with the statutory requirements.
If we're all happy, could I ask for a proposal that it be endorsed, please? Jill, seconder, please. Anybody? John? You can, yeah. So do you want to do that before the vote? Yeah. So Matt's got a couple of things he wants to mention before we take a formal vote on this. So please, Matt.
Thanks, Chair. These are things that have arisen since publication of the agenda, or at least in my mind anyway, Chair. In terms of the next meeting, if the committee are content, I would like to provide an update on consultation responses by Welsh Government in terms of the PEN review. The PEN review, as most members are aware, but also for the information of new members to the committee, it was a review essentially by Richard Penn, who was appointed by Welsh ministers to look at the regime in terms of standards as a whole within Wales, and then to report back with recommendations. It was a in-depth review with wide consultation, and then the Welsh Government put out a consultation on that review, which all responses have been put in, I think, back in November last year, in fact. And on the 14th of November this month, there's a response in terms of outcomes to the consultation. So I just think if we can have a report on that outcome for the next meeting, Chair. The second issue was I was going to suggest that we add as a committee a standing item to the agenda to receive any dispensations. Members of the committee will note, and we'll be coming on to that shortly, that there is a item for a dispensation for Councillor Harry Saville, who's now in the room, and I just think it would be useful to have a standing item, which then allows the flexibility for members of either the county council or town and community councils to put applications in as and when they might arrive up until the date of the meeting. So that's another suggestion for the forward work programme. And finally, we carry out, as independent members, should I say, of the committee, carry out visits to town and community councils. In fact, we've got a report on such a visit later in the agenda. And I'd like to suggest that we take a report that specifically schedules and agrees to a schedule of meetings for the next financial year, and that will be timely, Chair, because that will be in March, and then it's clear who will be attending and when, etc. And we can try and agree a draft schedule prior to the meeting between independent members. So those are my suggestions for the forward work programme, Chair.
Thank you, Matt. I think those are eminently sensible, both in terms of the dispensation and also just adding a bit more formality to our work programme and schedule of visits and so on. But has anybody any questions or thoughts on what Matt's had to say on the work programme and our schedule? No. In that case, with those additions, are our proposer and seconder still happy to endorse the work programme? Yes, thank you. Can I ask for a show of hands then? Thank you. That's unanimous. Moving on then to item 6. So as Matt was saying, that we have an application for dispensation today. I think it's the first one we've had for some time, but this is a proper piece of business that we are required to conduct on occasions. And on this occasion, the application is made by Councillor Harry Saville from Llandudno, who indeed is with us today. So, Matt, would you like to take us through the process then that we are required to undertake?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just first of all, generally for as a brief explanation about that regime, as we always have items on the agenda for declarations of personal and prejudicial interests by members of the committee, and of course that's the same across the council for any council meetings. Sometimes, Chair, there are circumstances in which members would like to be able to have a dispensation in terms of the restrictions that those matters impose on members under the Code of Conduct, where they have both personal and prejudicial interests. And there is a specific legislative and regulatory provision on the ability to apply for dispensations. And an application can be put in that relies on one or more of those grounds within regulations, and that it's for the committee chair to decide whether or not to grant those applications for dispensation in order to lift some of the restrictions that would usually apply where you have both a personal and prejudicial interest. So normally the circumstances are, if you have a personal and prejudicial interest, you declare it at the start of a meeting and then you can't take part further in the matter. And the application today from Councillor Harry Saville is asking for a dispensation in respect to the particular issue. The way that I would recommend that the committee deals with these kind of applications is to invite the councillors themselves to present it. I will just mention on Councillor Harry's behalf that clearly Councillor Harry does have a personal and prejudicial interest in respect of the application for a dispensation itself. However, it is usual and in fact necessary to enable a councillor to present their application, Chair. That's only right, and for members of the committee to ask any questions that they think are pertinent in order for them to be able to deliberate and to make a decision on the application. Once that presentation has taken place and members of the committee have asked any questions that they think are pertinent to that, it's then usual for the committee to consider that application and to seek advice from me and deliberate on it in private before then coming back to the meeting to announce the decision on that application. So that's how I would advise and recommend that we proceed with the application, Chair.
Thank you, Matt. Is that clear with everybody? Okay. So in that case, we've had the benefit of reading some background material on the matter. I hope that was straightforward enough. It seemed quite clear to me. But now, please, Councillor Saville, if you'd like to address the committee on your application.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just quickly, for completeness, if I should be declaring a personal interest in this, I will declare one now and I will complete the relevant paperwork in good time and submit it accordingly. As you'll see, I've submitted an application for dispensation. It relates to matters relating to both taxi licensing, so that's both private hire vehicles and hackney carriages, and also home to school transport. I've been really grateful for the support I've had from the monitoring officer in terms of advice and guidance and submitting the application. So if we just turn to the application form briefly, there are several levels of dispensation sought. So if I go through those quickly now, the first one is to be able to speak with officers on these issues. I think this is quite a reasonable one to ask for. Just to give you an example, I've been contacted by a hackney carriage proprietor that operates within Llandudno, only of him last week with a standard piece of casework. I've obviously had to go back to him and say, I'm awfully sorry. I'm not in a position to go and speak to the relevant officers at the local authority and raise this on your behalf, as I have a prejudicial interest. So it's simply enabling me to raise issues with officers verbally at that level. And I want to be really clear, casework issues like that, there's no decision being made. This is simply me picking up a phone to emailing an officer, in this case in my licensing department, and saying, I've been contacted by this taxi operator. They've got a concern. Is it something you're able to look into and respond to? I should also point out for clarity, in that specific case, I have no direct interest within the individual operator. The interest is a rather tangential one around my mother-in-law's involvement with the Conway Taxi Operators Group, which is an effectively moribund organisation that seeks to represent the taxi trade within Conway. So that's the first level of dispensation covered. The second, to write to officers and or the council, I consider to be the same as that. So if we come on to the third and fourth levels of dispensation, to speak and answer questions at council and at committee meetings, and to remain within the room during any debate. So obviously, from time to time, the council will debate issues or will make decisions around taxi licensing, taxi licensing policy, and home to school transport. So this ask is that I'm able to participate in those discussions. Just in terms of the committees that, before I go on, I just would like to be very clear. It's participate in those discussions, not vote on any matters. We will come on to that shortly. So let's just park the issue of voting on any motion. So it's just simply to participate in debate. The committees that I sit on within the council, so I sit on the council's general and statutory licensing committees. They do make decisions within their own rights. Many cases, the committee will resolve to make a decision following consultation which attracts no negative responses. So there's not many items where an immediate decision is made within that committee or those committees. I'm also a member of the Council's Finance and Resources Scrutiny Committee. Home to school transport does come up in discussion there. That committee does not make decisions. It simply makes recommendations to the Cabinet or full Council. So that covers those two levels of dispensation. The final one, and this is what I've wanted to come on to and provide a bit more information within the additional paperwork I've provided you with, is around voting, and specifically the form does ask me to specify which meetings the dispensation applies to. And from speaking to the monitoring officer before submitting the application, he advised that it could apply to votes on certain kinds of matters rather than others. So I've set these out within the additional memo I've provided, but just to go through them quickly. So I'm requesting dispensation to vote on matters affecting both Hackney Carriage and private hire policy, where the decision is to delegate a change in policy to officers following a public consultation with no objections. So to give you an example with this, Hackney Carriage fare setting, normally a request would come into a local authority. The committee would consider it. It would then go out to public consultation, and officers are delegated to make the changes themselves, provided there are no objections to the consultation. So it's an ask to be able to vote on matters like that. Obviously, if there were objections to public consultation and the matter was referred to committee for final resolution, I want to be really clear, I'm not asking for dispensation on those. Furthermore, and I don't think I would be able to ask for dispensation on this anyway, or I don't imagine it be legally sound, but just for the avoidance of doubt, the taxi company I have an association with, or more correctly, my mother-in-law, aunt and wife have an association with, I am not requesting a dispensation to vote on any matter relating to an application made in respect for driver, vehicle or operator's license from that company. And to be perfectly honest, I wouldn't feel comfortable making a vote or having a vote on that. A little bit further down, I've referred to votes on overview and scrutiny committees. I think that's quite straightforward. Those committees do not make decisions. By and large, they make recommendations to a final decision-making body, whether or not that's the council's cabinet, or I think in some cases full council itself. I'm sure the monitoring officer will be able to advise if that's incorrect. Finally, we'll come on to full council. So there are some decisions that full council is able to make. And obviously I do sit on that. So I've asked for a dispensation on all matters affecting home to school transport and taxi provision, where the decision is to make a recommendation or referral to another committee for further consideration. So it's a dispensation to be able to vote to refer it for further consideration, not a decision to actually, or not a dispensation to vote on a final decision. To be honest, I am unsure when those examples would be likely to arise, but I've included it for completeness. So that's a brief summary. I appreciate there's more information there, so I don't know if you have any questions from the committee chairman, but I'm happy to answer them as best I can.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks to Councillor Harry for that detailed explanation of the applications. I suppose it's just for completeness, the grounds that the committee have been asked to grant a dispensation on. I did mention before that there are specific grounds that you have to be satisfied apply, at least one or more of them. So the grounds that Councillor Harry has applied on is ground D, and now that is a ground that, in my view, the committee would always need to be satisfied applied, but does apply because that is that the decision to grant a dispensation would not damage public confidence in the conduct of the authority's business. So I expect it would be very rare indeed, if not never, that the committee would not want to be satisfied with that. The second ground is ground F, and that is that the dispensation be granted on the basis that it's justified by the councillor's particular role or expertise. And then finally, ground G, that relates to a specific part of Councillor Harry's application, which is to do with overview and scrutiny committees, where the actual dispensation is to apply specifically to those committees. So that's just an explanation of the grounds, just clarity on one point that Councillor Harry had made in terms of advice that I'd given in terms of circumstances where a dispensation would not be granted. I suppose in theory, the committee can grant a dispensation at any level. There is no specific bar from that within the regulations. But I think the point that Councillor Harry was making is that clearly in situations where it would be a direct decision on a particular matter to which personal prejudicial interest applies, that's likely to have an impact, then the committee would likely to be more concerned about granting a dispensation in those circumstances. So so far as that is helpful to the committee, Chair, I suppose, are there any questions by the committee for Councillor Harry before we retire to deliberate?
All right. So firstly, if you've had a chance to read both the application and, if necessary, the guidance that underpins such applications, and Matt's further explanation just now, are there any questions for myself or for the monitoring officer in terms of? Yeah, well, I'll come to that in a minute here. So Jill, please. Talking about procedure now rather than the specifics.
Thank you, Chair. The monitoring officers referred to the guidance. It would be helpful if we could all have sight of that when we deliberate. I appreciate it was attached to probably the back page of the hard copy, but we haven't been sent that as part of our agenda papers. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Yes, it's not guidance; it's the actual regulations themselves, and absolutely we'll have those before us when we deliberate.
Thank you. Any other procedural points? Thank you. In that case, if you're happy, Councillor Saville, I'd invite members to put any questions to you they think relevant to your application. Thank you. Any points? Councillor Carr?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just like to ask Harry about he might, maybe a resident would approach him and he want to follow up on that. That Harry comes from a multi-member ward, that there are 2 other councillors in that ward, and also one from his political party, that the same political party, that could actually take that up. So I think it could be taken up by other councillors in that ward. On the scrutiny committee, financial resources, very rarely does cabinet not go with the scrutiny. There's usually the debate's usually in the scrutiny committee, and the amount of debate in cabinet is very short compared to debate in scrutiny. I've not known occasions where the cabinet have gone against scrutiny, so it's very likely that any decisions taken in the scrutiny committees are likely to be upheld by cabinet. So although it's only a recommendation, those recommendations usually follow through. And some of the votes on scrutiny, 1 or 2 votes sometimes can make the difference. Well, just trying to clarify.
Yeah. Well, I think one of them was a question, if I may paraphrase it, which is, would it be feasible for if an individual with a tax issue went to another member of the council in the area? But that's my interpretation. My suggestion would be, these are points that we can note and when we come into our consideration. So I'm quite happy that these are read. Councillor Louise wants to come in, but before we do that, Councillor Saville, did you want to respond to anything that Councillor Carr's had to say?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll pick up on all those points. I think they are probably pretty valid points that other members of your committee may be thinking. So, first of all, regarding being a member of a multi-member ward, yes, I am. I do have 2 ward colleagues. I suppose the 2 things in my mind are, on that point, obviously all councillors will have their own areas of, I don't want to say expertise as if I'm over-egging myself, but their own areas of expertise, interest. So I can think, and the example that I raised just recently, the individual has come to me specifically as opposed to either of my 2 colleagues, and it is a matter that I would like to be able to follow up and respond to them on. And I don't mean any disrespect to either of my 2 ward colleagues with that, but I think every councillor will have their own areas of expertise and interest, as I'm sure in respect to my own ward, there will be issues where if an issue raised with Louise, she would understandably think, well, she would be best placed to deal with this, as I'm sure if an issue raised with my other ward colleague, Mandy Hawkins, she would also have the same thought process. There is also the issue that not every single ward is a multi-member ward. Some wards are single-member wards. And I suppose there's an issue of fairness or principle. If I were making this application representing a single-member ward, for example, Bethesda Trevorrow, Kyrene, would a different set of reasoning be applied? So that's the first instance. The second instance about cabinet usually following scrutiny decisions. I think in Conway, in this council, we have a pretty good what's the word I'm looking for, culture of pre-decision scrutiny. I think that's very strong. I think cabinet tend to follow scrutiny decisions. That is very much down to how our scrutiny committees work. So that's not down to any sort of regulatory framework. That's due to the fact that we have a cabinet that will more often than not reflect upon the points made by scrutiny. Cabinet does not always follow scrutiny recommendations. I can think of one, I'm sure, within the last year where a scrutiny committee made a very clear recommendation to the council's cabinet, and the council's cabinet did virtually the exact opposite. So there are instances where that doesn't happen. I do take the point that cabinet will normally take a scrutiny recommendation, but it doesn't have to, and it doesn't always happen. And I suppose also the point I would make is, if a scrutiny committee made a recommendation that perhaps wasn't the most sensible recommendation, the cabinet is there to correct that. Finally, regarding votes in scrutiny committees and the fact that some votes can be reasonably tight, Yeah, so I suppose this comes back to the point I've just made. The cabinet can obviously overturn a scrutiny recommendation. I suppose if you have a vote where the outcome is quite tight, doesn't that indicate that the scrutiny committee is actually really rather split on the issue? There isn't a clear-cut best case outcome or best right or wrong. I'm also curious, and I'm just refreshing my memory around circumstances in which dispensations can be granted. I'm unsure if there is anything within the dispensations, perhaps a monitoring officer can advise, where there's issues where members declaring interests and leaving the meeting, if that affects the outcome of the decision-making process for members not being able to participate, whether or not that's an issue that you can consider. I'm seeing the monitoring officer frowning, so that may not be correct. But those were the points I'd make to address the points that Councillor Carr's made, and if other members of the committee have those as well. Hopefully that's helpful.
I think that was a helpful discussion. Thank you, in clarifying those issues. So I'm grateful to both of you. Did you want to come in, Mark, on that?
I wasn't clear what the point was. Certainly what was said doesn't fall within any of the regulations in terms of grounds for granting a dispensation. But as I say, specifically, there is the specific ground, and that's been included in the application, which does relate to decisions at scrutiny committees and debates at scrutiny committees. Also, just clearly, just as a matter of law, just to be clear, it is a matter for the cabinet as to whether or not they do adopt the recommendation of an overview and scrutiny committee, notwithstanding what generally happens or what usually happens. So just to clarify that.
Indeed, and correct me if I'm wrong, I would make the point that notwithstanding whether this dispensation is granted or not, there is always the opportunity for a member who felt themselves particularly conflicted on the issue to make a specific declaration if it was thought appropriate to do so. Anyway, Councillor Louise, please.
Just wanted to ask a question specifically about how many times you've had to, there's been situations where Phoenix Transport has been, in licensing, as in they've been involved in a decision-making process, or you felt that, as you said, you don't want any dispensation to go out the room for Phoenix Transport. So I'm trying to get a feel for, do they have a monopoly of everything in Conway, or is it very occasionally that it comes forward? Just to give us an idea of context, please, with the company.
Yes, thank you. Right, so I've been on my licensing or two licensing committees since 2016. I've been a member for Finance and Resources, Overview and Scrutiny Committee since 2017. So I can't say in preparation for this meeting I have gone back through all of the papers forensically. What I would say, and we'll take the two issues, the licensing aspect and home school transport aspect separately. I cannot recall from a licensing perspective there being a discussion or debate around Phoenix Transport, one of its vehicles, or one of its drivers, or its operator's license that I have been involved in. I can certainly say not within the last year. In terms of the home to school contract or home to school transport side of it, so again, there's been no committee items that I've been involved in a debate on where Phoenix have been referenced in that or have been brought up. My hesitation or my concern when home to school transport does get raised within Finance and Resources, however, is obviously the company is a home to school transport provider for Conway County Borough Council. So that's why up until the present, I have declared a prejudicial interest in that item, just to be very, very clear and to, I think, not undermine public confidence in the decision-making process. So I hope that answer of a bit more context is helpful. To give you a very short answer, it has not come up. I think if I could very quickly provide a tiny little bit more information there, though, you'll see there's a reference to the Conway Taxi Operators Group, and I think this is the more challenging one, or it's the one I find more difficult in licensing meetings. This organisation has acted in the past as a effectively a representative group for the taxi trade within Conway. My mother-in-law was the last chairman of it. The group is effectively moribund. I know the last licensing committee meeting where a consultation on taxi policy came up, and I raised this because obviously there is this link with an organisation that represents the wider taxi trade. When I raised this issue with licensing officers, they said, we don't think there's an issue. We don't think the organisation effectively still exists. However, as you and other members will know, when we get road closure or traffic regulation notices from the Environment, Roads and Facilities Service, they are still copied to that organisation. So there's still recognition that that organisation exists within some parts of the council. I expect it could be reconstituted if it were desired to from its members. So that's why I'm wanting to be as transparent as possible for this and not say, oh, I've been told it's moribund, it's not an issue. I want to be very clear with members that unless it's clear that it's been disbanded, that it is something that should be considered.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rooney.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of questions. Oh, right. Can you hear me now, Councillor Harry?
I can hear you now.
Right.
From all the way over here.
Just a couple of questions really for clarification that I'm reading this correctly, and this is relating to voting, which is on page 13. So you're not seeking dispensation to vote on any matter relating to Phoenix Transport. Yeah, I can understand that. Then in paragraph 1, you are seeking dispensation there to vote, but only where it's a decision to delegate. And then we come on to para 2, para 3. You're actually seeking dispensation to vote on decisions affecting Hackney carriage policy and private hire policy. Now, if I'm reading that correctly, if you're voting on that, then those decisions could have an impact directly on Phoenix Transport, which is included in the overall class of Hackney carriages and private hire on that.
Right. We'll take, I'm afraid there's two answers to those, but we'll take the simplest one first. Private hire policy. Phoenix Transport is a private hire operator, so of course a change in private hire policy could well have an impact on the company. That's why up until now I excuse myself from those decisions, and that's why I am seeking the dispensation. I want to be very clear though, it is a dispensation around policy, so it would be around, say, standards for accessible private hire vehicles, not whether or not a vehicle that perhaps Phoenix Own would like to have licensed doesn't meet the policy criteria and is brought in front of members. It's not that. It's not something that would relate specifically to the company. But of course, I do take your point that it could have an impact, and that's why I'm seeking the dispensation. Just to come back to the Hackney carriage bit. So Phoenix Transport do not operate any Hackney carriages. And this is a big part of the reason why I've put in the dispensation. So I think I've mentioned Hackney carriage fares earlier within this meeting. The amount a Hackney carriage service provider charges the public has absolutely no impact on Phoenix Transport in the slightest, because they don't operate Hackney carriages that they're not licensed to. So that's the end of that. The reason I have referenced it, however, is coming back to this Conway Taxi Operators Group. My mother-in-law does have a position in it. She was the last chairman of it. The group is effectively moribund, and officers from this council's licensing department, I understand, treat the group as moribund. But nonetheless, in the interests of clarity and transparency, I would still prefer to be declaring an interest unless a dispensation is sought. Because understandably, someone could turn around. I think I've mentioned that Conway Taxi Operators Group are emailed by this council's Environments, Roads and Facilities Service when road closures are proposed. So I suppose one could argue, is the group really moribund if the council contacts it as a matter of course about road closures? So it's very much from my mind about wanting to seek that transparent clarity from yourselves and be transparent about it. But I suppose to answer very bluntly, Hackney carriage policy, that does not affect Phoenix Transport as a company on that specific point.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for the questions and for the responses. I think we're now in a position to retire and have a discussion. So if I could ask members of the Standards Committee only to, we've got a room set aside. And hopefully we can return not fairly swiftly with a decision. Thank you. Right, croeso nôl. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for your patience while we've been discussing the dispensation put forward by Councillor Saville, who is still with us. So I thank colleagues for a full debate around these matters and some clear decisions, which I'll now ask the monitoring officer to deliver.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the decision of the committee, having considered the application from Councillor Harry and all the questions and advice that has been given to the committee, is that dispensation be granted for Councillor Harry to speak to and to write to officers, but not in matters that directly relate to Phoenix taxes, to speak at committee and council meetings, but not in matters that are directly related to Phoenix, but not to vote. The committee decided that they will not grant a dispensation to vote, and that's in any committee setting. And finally, in terms of voting and remaining in the meeting, the committee decided that Councillor Harry can remain in the meeting and take part in the debate, but should leave the meeting before the vote is taken. Also that the dispensation is to last for a period of 12 months. So it will be incumbent then on Councillor Harry if he wishes to make a further application after the 12-month period.
So again, I thank colleagues for deliberation. Thank you, Councillor Saville, for putting this forward in a proper manner and following our procedures, which we acknowledge and are grateful for. So you're very welcome to stay, or you can go about your business.
Chair, I did neglect to say that I will write to Councillor Harry setting out in full the dispensation within the next day or so at most.
Thank you. So moving on then, item 7. I did declare an interest in this item at the beginning. So in terms of how we deal with it, I will vacate the chair. Perhaps the vice chair would like to take the seat. Brenda. I'll leave the microphone up.
Well, this is the first opportunity I've had to sit in this chair. I'm expecting it to be a rather brief activity, but there you go. Do you want to take us through, Matt?
Thank you, Chair. So this is to update the committee in respect of a particular independent member on the committee whose term on the committee will expire in January next year. That is in fact one of the reasons why the committee has been brought forward from January, as Clive Wolvendale has indicated that he's willing to serve another term on the committee if the committee and ultimately full council are minded to appoint him for a further term. So how that works in terms of the legislative position is that as the new members to the committee will be well aware, there is a need to advertise the post and to have some specific requirements in terms of the applicants that can apply for the post. However, once an independent member of the committee has been appointed for an initial term, there is the ability for the council to appoint for a second term without the need to re-advertise or re-interview in respect of the position. So what I'm asking the committee to do is to indicate whether or not they are content that I take a report to full council next week to recommend to council that Clive Wolvendale is appointed for a second term to the Standards Committee.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So we need a proposer and seconder. I don't know who was quickest there. Jill. Sorry.
Thank you. Just a question. If this committee is minded to recommend it, I'm wondering if the report that is given to council is actually got some further information about the chair's background, given that there's a relatively new administration and some councillors may not have been sort of privy to the information from 4 years ago.
I don't tend to include very much personal information in reports to council. In fact, this administration has past 18 months now, so has knowledge of Clive Wolvendale as a member of the committee. So my proposal was to put a recommendation to council to essentially to reappoint him, to point out that, which I think I'm sure the committee would agree. It's fair to say that he's a hard-working member of the committee and has attended meetings diligently and has had an active role in seeking to help to uphold good standards within the council. So I didn't propose to put personal details because those are the kind of matters that you would include in an advert for a new member. So I was going to propose on the basis of Clive's work to date for the committee that he be reappointed for a second term on that basis.
Any other question? Any proposer for the recommendation? Frank, seconder. David, thank you. So can we have a show of hands in support of the recommendation to reappoint Clive for a further term? Looks pretty unanimous.
I think that was unanimous, Chair. I'll go and invite Clive back into the meeting. I will also let him know what the outcome was.
Whoops. Thank you.
Chair, just to inform you that a report will be taken to a full council next week to recommend your reappointment to the committee.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone for your confidence. I don't take it lightly. This is an important responsibility on behalf of this county and this authority, and it's been my privilege to be part of this for the last few years, and I look forward to sharing the journey with you for another couple of years at least. I think part of the success of the committee is the strength of the team, the diversity of the team, and we've added to that just today. And I think the equal engagement of the independent members and the elected members, which I think makes for good and fruitful discussion and some good decisions. And I commit myself to the role and to ensuring that we fulfill our responsibilities to the best of our ability. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you. Moving on then. Item 8A, pages 14 to 17, is the Ombudsman's findings. And I think Kerry's going to speak to this.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've got the next two items. The first, which deals with the Ombudsman's findings and information from the Ombudsman's website. The committee will recall on the last occasion we had a number of cases that we discussed, and unfortunately on this occasion there's just the one case that I have to tell you about.
Unfortunately, is the case?
As the case may be, yes. Yeah. You'll see at paragraph 3.2, this concerns a complaint that a member of this council had breached the code of conduct by participating and voting in a council meeting which he attended virtually while appearing to be driving. The account that appears in the report that I've sent to you is available on the Ombudsman's website, and it summarises the facts and the allegation that was made to the Ombudsman. So the investigation considered whether the member had breached the code by bringing his office or the authority into disrepute. The information was obtained from the council, including minutes of the relevant meetings and also video footage of the incidents in question. That information was also obtained from the member concerned and the police. Video footage from the first council meeting showed the member to be driving a vehicle whilst participating in the meeting, and the member had acknowledged that this was the case. The member, by way of explanation, said it was important he attend all meetings. Subsequent videos of other meetings showed the car either to be stationary or that the member was in the passenger seat. Police advised they had not received a complaint in relation to the incident, and it would not now be in the public interest to investigate matters. The Ombudsman comment was that it was not his role, her role rather now, to consider whether the member's actions would have amounted to criminal behaviour, and said that the police decision did not mean that the member's actions were considered acceptable. The Ombudsman found the actions of the member were suggestive of a breach of the code, saying that the public have a right to expect elected members to engage fully with the council business, and to attend a meeting whilst driving a vehicle demonstrated poor judgment and had the potential to bring the council into disrepute. The Ombudsman considered there was evidence of a single incident where the member was driving and had interacted with the meeting, but that it did not appear to be indicative of repeated behaviour. Subsequent videos showed the member to be in the passenger seat of or in a stationary vehicle, suggesting the member had not repeated the behaviour and had learned from the complaint. The Ombudsman finding was, as though the member's actions were suggestive of a breach, that the fact that he had not repeated the behaviour since and the lack of a criminal investigation meant it would not be in the public interest to take further action. And the Ombudsman's conclusion under section 64, subsection 4B of the Local Government Act was that no action needed to be taken in respect of the matters investigated. However, the decision was to remain on record and will be taken into account if there are any future similar behaviour by the member.
Thank you. I think it's very clear, Kerry. Thank you for delivering that. We're required to take a vote on the recommendation, which is that we consider these cases. So that's simply the recommendation, not around the specifics. But if I may, just in relation to this item, I was mindful of the fact that the Ombudsman is quite clear here that the actions were suggestive of a breach of the code, but the reason for not moving it forward was it was deemed not in the public interest. So I think the clear message here was that there was something amiss, but because of the mitigation and because of the public interest, they didn't take it forward. So on that basis, I took the opportunity of having a word with the monitoring officer, who in fact assured me that he had a conversation with the member in question on this matter, where it was explored in some detail, and that the member has indeed acknowledged that the conduct was not what was to be expected, and given a clear undertaking that it will not be repeated. And I think that that's probably an important conclusion to this, in terms of just squaring off that the issue was not just left hanging, notwithstanding the Ombudsman's investigation and report. So I just wanted to make you alive to that, and I thank you for the monitoring officer for making the intervention. Yes.
presume we're not really supposed to comment because it's not us.
I don't think so. No,
Yeah,
it's just the recommendation is about just noting these cases and that they are brought to our attention.
Yeah, so we're not here to sort of say, well, in my opinion.
No, I think
Okay.
no. That's no. The ombudsman made it clear, but as I said, I just wanted to make alert to the fact that that just wasn't quite the end of the matter, but it's now has been resolved. I think to everybody's satisfaction, and we can move on. Should we just get Jill and then you, Mark? Thank you.
Thank you. I may be completely mistaken, but I'm not sure if there have been further instances of this particular member still being in a car, albeit in a passenger seat, and contributing to.
Yeah, I'm not aware of it, and I think we're probably straying away from the issue at hand here. We're not in terms of a further investigation. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I think that will probably be for another forum in another way. I think we're just discharging this issue now.
No, I think that, if I may, Chair, as well, just generally why, because I am conscious that it was my suggestion, agreed by the committee, to bring these reports as a standing item to the meeting, and my view on why that's important is because the committee can there pick up on any particular trends in terms of, because this happens to be a report that relates to a councillor of this council. Of course, last time there were a number of reports when my deputy monitoring officer brought a report. There were a number of different reports related to various different councils. So it is a coincidence that there is only one since that last time and that it relates to this council. And I think that the idea is that part of the remit of the Standards Committee is to help to promote and maintain high standards amongst councillors in this county, and that's both county councillors and town and community councillors. And in my view, it is helpful, therefore, to see, in looking at these reports from the Ombudsman's office, as to whether or not there are any particular trends, because it might be that, as well as noting the report, there might be some particular trends that the committee thinks might warrant an email, for example, out to members to say, this is a particular trend at the moment. Please be advised and aware to avoid X, Y, Z. And of course, where we've just got one particular incident, which Chair, you have referred to a discussion I've had about that. I don't think there can be a particular trend to be identified, and I think it's probably just a matter for the committee to note, unless, of course, the committee thinks otherwise.
Thank you for that clarification, and I think I think we probably all welcome this information coming forward. It does enable us to make decisions around with context and with the benefit of practical examples. If I may, Jill, in terms of your point, which I didn't want to conflate with this, if you or anybody else has any information about misconduct by this member or any other in relation to this issue or any other that might arise, please bring it to the attention of the monitoring officer, who I'm sure will deal with it in the appropriate manner. But it was not for discussion today in terms of this issue. It's been dealt with by the Ombudsman and thereafter and is discharged. That the recommendation is that it's clear enough the members consider the cases on a regular basis to assist in duties promoting and maintaining high standards, and that's the proposal or recommendation to be voted upon this morning. Is that clear enough for everybody? I'm really, it's good that we get the detail out there, but we have to be careful about how we deal with it in terms of other responsibilities, including the Ombudsman, including the monitoring officer, and of course the right of any of individuals as well to be dealt with fairly. So, unless there's anything else from you, Matt, can we take a vote, please, on the recommendation? Can I have a proposer, please? Or the recommendation that these. Thank you, Louise. Seconder, please. John, vote, please, in favour. Thanks very much. So that was item 8A. Item 8B is the Ombudsman's Annual Report 2022-23, which consumes most of your pack, pages 18 to 157. It's actually not a bad read, is it? So I hope you've all had a go through it. So I think it's very well written. So we have a recommendation that, having had regard to the Public Service Ombudsman's Wales Annual Report, and having noted the Code of Conduct complaints relating to Conwy that were submitted during 2022-23 were not investigated or were discontinued, the committee concludes that no action is needed. So basically, we are seeking to agree the outcome of the PSOW's deliberations and what is noted therein, and that we are satisfied that the office of the PSOW is being conducted properly in relation to the conduct of Conwy Council.
Chair, is it just possible to mention something from the report?
Of course, yeah.
If you members may recall from the last occasion when I brought a report about the Public Service Ombudsman's letter, that a certain amount of the detail that's included in this report was actually in that report that I presented last month. And one of the outcomes of that is that there's in the options at section 4, there's mention that Cabinet notes the contents of the report. I don't think that is necessary. I think that was an overhang from the previous report that we had on the last occasion. So if I can just ask for permission to withdraw that reference to Cabinet at paragraph 4, relating to options, as that is not required. That related to the letter from the Ombudsman, and the data that's contained within the report today is data that it relates to the annual report only. Okay.
Thank you. I'm now live again. So with that addendum from Kerry in mind, could I have a proposal on the recommendation with regard to the Ombudsman's report, please? Jill, propose. Seconder, Frank. Show of hands, please. Thank you. It's unanimous. Moving on then to item 9, feedback from independent member attendance at meetings. So this is the work of the independent members in visiting town and community councils across the county, of which there are many. And since our last meeting, which was only in September, I think there've been a couple of visits. I think Jill's been most active, I think it's fair to say, in that time. So if you share what you've found with us, I'd be grateful.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've observed 2 different community and town councils. The first was on the 23rd of October of this year at Colwyn Bay Town Council. It was a fully hybrid meeting with 16 people present, 7 in person and 8 online. And there was also 1 observer, a county councillor, online. In addition, there were 5 apologies, 2 officers and myself. It was a lengthy meeting, almost 3¼ hours. The main reason for that, though, was because there was extensive discussion about the consultation from Conwy County Borough Council about the proposals about the Colwyn Bay regeneration and active travel project. So that was the main reason for it being such a lengthy meeting. In terms of information that is required to be available for the public to see on the website, which I looked at prior to attending the meeting, the website was extremely well laid out. The minutes and agenda were clearly accessible, and members of council were very clear by ward and contact details with full biographical information available. There were 3 outstanding contact details and biographies due to them being relatively new, and I understand that's in the process of being updated. What was also available on the website was a register of interests available for each councillor. The training plan had been published and was easy to find, and the annual report likewise was also published and easy to find. So all of that information was appropriate. In terms of at the meeting, as I mentioned, there were no members of the public present, but they had invested in up-to-date technology to enable remote public participation. In terms of declarations of interest, there was a specific agenda item that allowed for that at agenda item 3, and the invitation was very clear. And members were encouraged to make any declarations. Having said that, no declarations were made at that stage at item 3, but 2 declarations of interest were made later on at the beginning of the relevant agenda item. What they referred to, the first was in relation to an item about the Community Regeneration Fund. And that was a personal declaration that was made. And the other one was relating to funding also, this time for Ysgol Brynelion. 2 members actually work at the school, and the clerk was very effective in offering advice that in both cases, as the funding request was below £500, then it was personal interest only, and they would be able to remain in the room and contribute to the discussion. So as a result of that, because there were no prejudicial interests, everyone remained in the room throughout. In terms of more broadly, it was a very, very well structured and extremely efficiently run meeting, despite the length of the discussion. It was led very well by the chair, who was the mayor, and was supported very ably and effectively by the clerk. There was lots of space for discussion while still being very tightly run. Technology actually was used very well because there was a good use of polls, online polling, to be able to vote, and also sharing the agenda papers on screen. So in summary, the 3 proposed suggested actions from my observations there were to remind and encourage all members that if they have a declaration of interest to make, also to state it at the beginning of the meeting under item, in this case, agenda 3. They did make the declarations at the relevant agenda item. The second suggested action is just to ensure the website is updated for those remaining 3 councillors. And then finally, it may not have been appropriate in this circumstance, but really to consider whether or not extremely lengthy agenda items could be moved to take place outside of the main meeting, but clearly that's the council to decide. Thank you. Thank you. And the second and final, unless anyone's got any questions about that. No. Okay. And the second and final meeting that I attended was actually last night. So this is hot off the press. This was Llanddulas and Rhyd y Foel Community Council. It wasn't a hybrid meeting. There were 6 people present in person and 1 observer as a county councillor, and there were 2 apologies, 1 officer in terms of the clerk, and myself attending. It was the meeting was just shy of 2 hours, 1 hour 59 minutes. Again, as with the previous observation, I looked at the website prior to attending, and I could see that the minutes and agenda were very clearly accessible, and the website was very clearly laid out. I understand that the website is in the process of being updated, and at the moment there are quite a number of outstanding contact details for councillors in terms of photos, emails, whether they've been co-opted, what the party affiliation is, and so on. But my understanding from the clerk is that that will be updated. The register of interest, there is one available in hard copy. Again, it's not currently available on the website. And I understand from the clerk that that will be published. And likewise with the annual report, there is a hard copy available, not yet on the website, but the clerk has assured me it will be placed on there. And finally, the training plan that was published on the website and was very easy to find. In terms of the meeting, there was good use of technology. The technology was used so that all members could look at the agenda items and papers on screen. And if there had been remote attendance, that screen could have been used. In terms of declarations of interest, there was a specific agenda item, and that invitation was clear. This was agenda item 2. There was one declaration at that point made at agenda item 2, although as an observer, it wasn't clear to me for which item it referred to at that point and what it was for and whether it was personal or personal and prejudicial. 3 further declarations of interest were made later on at the beginning of the relevant agenda item, but not during the initial agenda item 2. So in total, there were 4 declarations of interest that were made. One related to a grant allocation relating to the village hall, and a councillor stated at the beginning of the discussion that as they helped out, that they should declare an interest. It was the clerk gave some very effective and helpful public advice at that point and stated that it was not needed as they only helped out. And after the meeting, although it wasn't explained during the meeting, the clerk clarified to me that as the councillor was a representative from the council on the village hall, that they had an exemption, and it would just be helpful perhaps to explain that rationale during the meeting to everyone present. The second declaration of interest was relating to, there's a project called Survey 5 to Drive, and the county councillor, who was an observer, stated at the beginning of the discussion that he didn't know that it was on the agenda, but he explained to everyone the reason for his declaration was because he'd applied for a footpath to become a right-of-way. However, the councillor remained in the meeting and did not comment. So as my understanding is that it is a personal and prejudicial item, but he did not step out of the room. And then the final 2 declarations of interest were relating to, it was the final agenda item on correspondence relating to something called the Alpine Lodge. Both the chair and the county councillor left the room. Neither explained because it was because they had a personal and prejudicial interest or why they were leaving. So for me as an observer, it wasn't apparent, although the other councillors, as I understand it, seemed to know why, and I was the only observer in the meeting. So in summary, the technology was used very well, using the screen with each agenda item. It was a very well structured and very well run meeting again. There was lots of space for discussion, and the chair was extremely well supported by the clerk with good interaction between them. So the proposed recommendations are, which I know is in hand anyway, firstly, to update the website for all 8 councillors to show their photos, their email, contact details, whether they are co-opted, which ward they are representing and what their party affiliation is. Secondly, again, I know this is in hand, but to ensure the printed copies of both the Register of Interest and the annual report are both published on the website. And then finally, to encourage all members that if they have a declaration of interest to make, also to state it at the beginning of the meeting under agenda item 2, and to explain whether it is personal or a personal and prejudicial interest, and also the reason for the declaration. So apologies, that's a very lengthy one, but that's it. Thank you.
Since you only went there yesterday evening, both very thorough and I'm sure of value to both the councils concerned. So thank you. Matt's going to come in a minute, but I think this is one of the most important roles of the independent members. It's probably the only way in which town and community councils can receive support locally from members of the authority, representatives of the authority, and we're definitely interested in their work. To our new independent members, rest assured you'll be hopefully embarking on these visits very soon. We'll be perhaps have a little session about how we go about this and the template we developed, and perhaps go with some, with some support to begin with. But they are very enjoyable from my point of view and really interesting. Matt.
Yeah, just very briefly, just a couple of points of clarity for the committee. And in terms of registers of interest, that there isn't actually a requirement on town and community councils to print a register. That there's no statutory requirement for that. That's something that we have at county level only. However, as declarations come in, there's then a requirement to have those themselves made clear and available. So just a point of clarity there. In terms of declarations of personal and prejudicial interest, that's absolutely right. As Jill says, that the preference is those are declared at the point that they're invited on the agenda, but there is something specific within the code that does say, or as soon as the interest becomes apparent, and I don't know the particular circumstances, but there is, of course, the potential that it only becomes apparent at a later point in the meeting. So there is provision within the code to provide for that. So just those couple of points of clarity, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks again to Jill for undertaking those. I know we've got some more planned for the remainder of this year, and then we're going to have a more formal schedule in conjunction with our work programme for 23-24. Thanks very much. Item 10, couple of pages in 158 to 169 in your pack is the update to the register of interests amongst members. Yes, Louise, please.
Yeah, just a few technical queries. I think in Councillor Cathy Augustine's, the information in 2B needs to be in 3C because it's relating to payments.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, can you hear? Mic's on.
I am. Are you here?
Right.
Just a few technicalities, a bit of just tidying up is in Cathy Augustine's, the information in 2B relates to her payment for local election expenses. That needs to be in 3C. It's just in the wrong. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, and then the other thing is just how they're presented. I was looking at the Councillor Sue's, where if you looked at it as a member of public on these, you'd think she'd removed herself from 1,000,001 different committees. Which page? Let me hold on. Yeah, you've raised that question, and I'm sure she hasn't just stepped down from everything. 166. Is it 166? Yeah. So they come to us because there's been some change. But if you look at hers, and you look into sort of address organisation she's on, body to which she represents, it's just said she's left all of them, and I'm sure that's not the case.
Yeah, I've raised this myself. It's very unclear, isn't it? So I'll speak to those who do the updating and see if there's any way we can make it clearer.
Yeah, just because it would confuse the public and me.
Chair, I think those are fair comments. I was reading through it myself, and it is a bit unclear, and it's something that I think we need to try and look at.
Well, thanks for flagging that up. Any other points, David?
Yeah, Councillor Gareth Jones, I understand that he's now on the North Wales Fire Authority, and that doesn't seem to be listed. That should be the register of interest, shouldn't it?
Can you pick that up? I'm not clear on. Oh no, I am. I think Gareth is. So yeah, just pick that up.
Is it a recent thing, Dave? Is it? No.
Yeah, it's fairly recent.
Yeah. It does, of course. Yeah. In that case, if there are no more comments, a show of hands, please, to note the interest. Proposer Frank, seconded Brenda. Be happy. Thank you. Moving on then, item 11, an exempt item. So I need a proposer and seconder that we go into a closed session. Thank you, Frank. Seconded, Jill. So in that case, we will do that. So at that point, we move into a closed session. So if people want to rejoin,